Our last but not least today is Miss Hristina Crenn, who will be saying a bit more about the difference between women's rights and feminism. So Hristina, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hristina Crenn. I am originally from Macedonia. I am currently living in Istanbul, and I'm a student at Sorbonne University of Law. And also I'm
Alicia, hey.
Hello.
Hi, hello. I apologize. We are in the breakout room, so it took a bit longer, you know, to get out of them and to admit you. Could you please just let me know in which group you wanted to be? Was it the group 2?
Yes, it was the second one.
Okay.
Thank you for these arrangements. Sorry for being late.
No worries, no worries.
all right. Well, here is my presentation. As I know that we're limited up to 12 minutes, I'll be trying to be as brief as possible. Well, why I chose this topic initially? I chose this topic because I have been writing papers for other journals about the French way, the French type of feminism, European type of feminism. But once I asked myself, like, what is the main difference between women's rights and feminism? So I sort of decided to shape the topic of this paper or of this presentation in this way, just to research more and to understand more the difference that is crucial in my opinion. So basically, I would like to emphasize that feminism emerged as a social phenomenon, while from the other side, in this perspective, we're analyzing not only the notion of womanhood, but also the notion of manhood, their characteristics and contradictions, as well the status of the patriarchy as part of the social phenomenon, and the woman's inferiority as also part of that social circular way of shaping and forming the status of the woman in the society. Well, I would like to make the connection with some historical examples of liberal feminism, Marxist or communist way of feminism, the multiracial feminism, and basically the postmodern or post-constructivist feminism. I am not aiming to analyze in deep all of these types of feminism, but to make a comparative research about the basically the essence of my topic, which I think is crucial when we're analyzing especially the social phenomenon of feminism, or where feminism emerged and how. Well, I think that personally think that the main difference between women's rights and feminism is that feminism, as I said, is a social phenomenon, while women's rights is a legal category, and that is the main difference or distinctions. Even though they have similitudes, they have also differences in terms of how do we categorize them legally. For instance, while we study law, we do not talk about feminism, we talk about women's rights. But when we study sociology or philosophy, we study about feminism, also political science. Therefore, I believe that somewhere in the, basically after the French Revolution, there was one declaration that basically marked or shaped the French way of feminism, which was the Universal Declaration of the Woman and the Female Citizen, that was basically promulgated and drafted in 1791 by Olympe de Gouges. And one particular verse of this declaration is the Tocsin of Reason, referring to the power of the superiority of the patriarchy. Therefore, we are having here a declaration, a female declaration, that is basically the copy or the equivalent of the Universal Declaration of the man and the citizen. Therefore, Olympe de Gouges, a French prominent woman of letters, is arguing that the initial declaration that was basically promulgated in 1789 in the aftermath of the French Revolution is basically only referring the status of man and is discriminating the social status of women. Therefore, 2 years later, in 1791, she decided to create a female declaration. And she's asking men in this declaration, men, are you capable of being just? Therefore, justice is not included only in the sphere of the patriarchy as a social phenomenon, but also is reflecting the existence of the woman as subjects, as primordial subjects of the society. Therefore, in my opinion, to some extent, the French Revolution was also a female revolution. Why I say this? Because the Women's March that occurred on 5th of March, 1789, that was led actually by the ladies of the Third Estate. The Third Estate in the time of France or the French absolutism were the people who were living at the margins of the society. The first and second estate was endowed with the members of the nobility. Therefore, the Third Estate was the one who was deprived of human rights. Therefore, the woman, basically in this period, asked Marie Antoinette, who was the last queen of France, asked her why the price of bread is so high. So she answered them in such a rude way, saying, so let them eat cake, because the cake was cheaper than the piece of bread. Therefore, in my opinion, feminism discusses the social questions of women's subjugation, not only their social status, but also it reflected this to an ideology. To some extent, feminism became an ideology, and it is nowadays. Therefore, it is important to mention that from a sociological perspective of view, as feminism also studies the influence of cultural traditions and the centurial status quo regarding women's perception or subjugation in the society. Well, the notion of womanhood, in my opinion, is a natural prerogative that I'm stating here that is actually provoked the birth of feminism, not only as a social theory, but also as a human concept of thought. Therefore, this concept of thought is making feminism not only as to be an ideology, but also a veritable science of thought by its codification. Therefore, over time, we know that always when we study law, basically we know that feminism and women's rights is all about combating the effects of the superiority of the patriarchy and eradicating the social status of women's inferiority. Even though this might sound descriptive at the beginning, it's so important and relevant to mention it because it's exacerbating to some extent the flow of feminism and women's rights. Well, I think that the main difference, as I said, between feminism and human rights is the way they are categorized. Feminism is a social question, women's rights is a legal question. Well, I would like to mention the important works of some contemporary women's females who are actually the recent Supreme Court Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg from the States, who was actually the founder of the Women's Rights Project and said that only women are having true equality when they share the same responsibility with men for the next generation. Therefore, over time, I would like to mention in the other slide, Maya Angelou, who is famous for saying that feminism might be, and the status of woman in history might be shaped as a twisted line, but whatever you do, women will always fight for their own rights and they'll raise. Therefore, there is, in somehow, women are unstoppable regarding their fighting for their rights. And she's saying, as she's protesting against the patriarchy, and she's saying that people will always forget the words that you said, but they will never forget the way you make them feel. Mary Wollstonecraft was a prominent woman in the era of Olympe de Gouges that actually published 1 year after Olympe de Gouges published the Universal Declaration of the Female Citizen in France. She's British, Mary Wollstonecraft, and she's actually the mother of Mary Shelley, who is actually the author of the novel Frankenstein. Therefore, Mary published the Vindication of Women's Rights. Now we are switching to the contemporary question. Before I conclude, 2 more slides, is we studied basically the way feminism and women's rights are trying to portray the emphasis of our society, how this is applied in our contemporary world. Therefore, in 2011, the Istanbul Convention was basically promulgated, and there was the question of the effectivity of this convention. And the phenomenon that is occurring every single day is the increased number of femicides. And this is going to my next question. Are legal provisions dormant? Like we are capable as human beings to draft new laws, but are we really capable of implementing them properly? And later on, Eleanor Roosevelt in 1948 promulgated basically, or she was the co-author of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. This is what she says in the preamble of this declaration. But is the future really fantastic regarding women's rights? We're not quite sure. My conclusion ends with that I would like in this paper to analyze not only the philosophical, sociological, and political and legal perspective of feminism and women's rights, but also mention some empirical data about the increased number of femicides in the society, because it's from a legal perspective of point of view, it's a crime, and therefore, what are the statistical data and samples regarding this issue? My question is like, did nature didn't deprive women from their rights in the course of history, but men did? Well, this is debatable, of course. What is the legal status of women in the era of COVID-19 and the post-COVID-19 era? What to expect, what to predict? Statistics can help us to analyze the scope of a peculiar situation in the society, but that cannot prevent actually the number of femicides to decrease or to increase. Therefore, I think that it's feminism as a social issue and women rights as a legal category, it's much more distinct, is that this main distinction makes clear the essence of this concept. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Hristina. So unfortunately, Mr. Lewandowski, Ms. Valentina Scotti, and also Ms. Irene Spigno did not receive your article as it was submitted quite late, but we were able to see the presentation. So maybe if Ms. Valentina Scotti, you could comment on what was heard so far.
Yes, I have to say that this presentation quite incited in my mind a lot of comments, so I'll try to be brief in order to keep the time. I would say that there are some positive aspects of this presentation, but I have also to say that some negative ones came to my mind in terms of methodology, clearness, that probably will help you in providing a better final version of the article. Because the topic you are proposing is for sure of interest. I mean, I basically ground all my course on gender-based discrimination and law at Koch University on the difference between women's rights that are grounded on gender equality and feminism as a social movement. So I totally agree with your premise. Nevertheless, it is, and of course, also the reconstruction of the political thought, let's call it this way, around how feminism and women's rights were built, from Olympe de Gouges to Mary Wollstonecraft, is absolutely correct. What I'm wondering, what is not clear to me actually is what is your research question in this article? Apart from this strong background, what are you claiming in your article? If I correctly understood, your claim is whether were men who deprived women from freedom and rights, and it seemed to me that this is a question that you are raising in your presentation. I would encourage you to read Gerda Lerner, Origins of Patriarchy. And of course, I understood that you are studying in Turkey, but she's renowned all over the world. Also, Candiotis, Bargaining with Patriarchy, where you can better understand that if, of course, men had a role, also women gave up to certain freedoms in a certain historical moment. So probably this can be of help. And another question in terms of scholarship that I can give to your article, to you for your article, is that although it is absolutely true that women's rights are something and they have to be considered in the legal perspective, and feminism is a social movement, we are also observing a trend, I would say also in the literature, at least since the end of the 90s of last century.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned Mary Wollstonecraft, because that's a literature point of that in terms.
Sorry, I couldn't get how it answered my point.
And that's why I mentioned Mary's Wollstonecraft book, because she's not a legal scholar, but she's a literature, basically a literature expert who is basically mentioning something about women's rights. But in my opinion, even though she's mentioned legal concept, that's why I mentioned her just as an overview.
No, I was saying, let's say the other way around. What I was saying is that in the legal scholarship, we are observing a penetration of feminist approaches. For instance, in 1998, so when I was saying last century, I was thinking to the 20th century, it was Barnett, if I'm not wrong, who wrote a book on feminist jurisprudence. So maybe you can be interested in seeing and also Irene Spino will present something which considered the penetration of the feminist approach in case law. So probably you would like to consider also how these levels are now overlapping. And of course, you mentioned Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She's another perfect example of how the levels overlap. She was a feminist activist and she was for sure a jurist. So it's clear in my mind why you want to divide and create this difference, but at the same time, in the final version of the article, I will underscore that, of course, individuals are not with single entities, and there can be both. I don't know whether my reasoning is clear to you, but I would suggest just
I see. Like, you would like me also to analyze some aspects of, well, as you mentioned, it, I think is totally relevant, important of the feminist jurisprudence that you mentioned about. I didn't tackle much the authors of the 20th century. It's very true. Even though I mentioned Ruth, I think that I'll try to figure out a more conceivable way of approaching this issue. And therefore, even though I want to divide them, my aim is also to say that how much ever you divide them, they're still similar.
And these probably also Ruth Ruber Marine works can help you. Obviously, McKinnon can help you. But I would stay a little bit more on the elaboration of the 20th century because it also better supports your points. If your points is that there is a difference, but also overlappings. Okay, I'll stop here. I'm taking.
Thank you for suggestions. They're really, really relevant, important. Thank you a lot.
You are welcome. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Valentina. Mr. Lewandowski has already said, even though you did not receive the articles up front or the proposal of the article up front, would you like to comment?
Yes. Thank you very much. Some of my comments were already raised in a discussion before, because my main question to you was also what is the final research question or thesis for the article, because you gave a lot of information, but I somehow couldn't find it in a way. My comments maybe also a kind of a can have a bias of being basically a political thought researcher, and that's and political ideologies, and specializing in it. And you gave a lot of examples of the feminist writings, but they are mainly old feminist writings from the beginning of the feminism, which is, of course, they are still a very good source of information and so on. But I would be quite interested in also seeing how, like, the second or the third wave of feminism can contribute to your topic, and also give a bit more indication of the feminism as political ideology, because this overlappings between political ideology and social movements are practically very hard to disconnect today, and treating this as something different. But this was something that really struck me, that there's writings from the Enlightenment period, which are like a founding documents for the feminism, and then you just moved to 2011 and
Yes.
and the Istanbul Convention, and, like, 200 years of feminist tradition, various movements that you mentioned, which of course is just a small portion of what really feminism is. It's a huge concept. There's my fear to some extent that, well, this will be a huge article, because you have so many things to check. So this would be really one thing that I see that might be a kind of a difficulty for you, is that you really need to maybe a bit to limit this research, because then it will be will be a kind of a really big text, and maybe even a bit more than just a simple article and a short book, almost. That's my impression from what you said. So I will stop at that moment. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewandowski. Unfortunately, we do not have the comments from Ms. Arenz Pina. She recorded already the video with the comments before your article was received. Are there any comments from the public, maybe? No? Okay, in that case, Hristina, I would like to maybe reflect a bit on what was. So I also had a bit of a same issue with the article proposal not being as focused as it probably should be if we are talking about a bit shorter text than a textbook. However, one of my concerns, so to say, is also regarding your main claim, which goes in a form that women's rights are a legal question or something that we are talking about from the legal point of view, while the feminism is a social or sociological question. And that this is the only difference between women's rights and feminism. So I'm not completely sure about that. I still believe that feminism is a bit more today as only a social movement, I think, as the feminism is a strive for the political, economic, personal, social, etc. Equality of both sexes. So I still believe that in the notion of feminism, we are talking a bit more about the gender equality as such, and only trying to reduce it or limit it to the women's rights. If we are talking about the latter from a legal perspective, I don't really think that this is completely true, or that it is a bit too limited, if I may say so. Also, I think that this is very visible from what feminism took on in the last years. So it's not only about women's rights. We know that feminism took on also a battle for the LGBTQI+, etc. So it's much broader, I would say, than only women's rights. And here, I'm just afraid that we would be losing the notion of gender equality. So the equality of both or all sexes, as you may consider appropriate. So maybe that would be a comment from my side.
All right. Well, I agree with what you have said, but in that case, I agree that it might sound too much limited, but I wanted to include my perspective in the terms like if I basically made the topic to be the difference between gender equality and feminism, in that case, I could mention what the point that you mentioned about. But I particularly would like it to focus more on the evolution of the woman's emancipation and how that was shaped. Even though I know that as a topic, it might sound as a deep research topic, as one of a textbook. It is though I would like, I switched basically the 20th century because I think that in the 20th century, the relevance, even though there is relevance of feminism, second and third wave, but I was afraid that that will make the article too much descriptive if I basically talk about every single wave of feminism. Therefore, that's why I wanted to stick a little bit with the sociological point of view about feminism and women's rights from the legal perspective, from what I studied, basically. About politics, I do not find personally feminism to be only as a political ideology. Regarding what I said, I think is more, or at least the way I understand feminism, even though it might sound political, but it is very much a societal problem, deep rooted in the traditions of the culture itself.
Thank you very much, Hristina. Okay, so we have finished